The autumn evening at Jasmine's kitchen buzzed with lively chatter as Sarah Thompson arrived for her friend Monica's birthday dinner. She was running 15 minutes late after a long day at Atlanta General Hospital, where she worked as a physical therapist. Her dark curls were pulled back in a neat bun, and she had barely managed to change from her scrubs into a simple blue dress. "Sarah, over here." Monica waved from a large round table in the corner. As Sarah made her way through the restaurant, she noticed an unfamiliar face among their regular friend group. A handsome man in a wheelchair, dressed in a crisp white shirt and navy blazer. "Everyone, this is my coworker James Wilson," Monica announced as Sarah took her seat. "And James, this is Sarah, the amazing physical therapist I was telling you about." James smiled warmly, his brown eyes crinkling at the corners. "Monica hasn't stopped talking about you. Apparently, you work miracles with your patients." Sarah felt her cheeks warm slightly. "I just try my best to help people reach their goals," she replied modestly, settling into the only empty chair, which happened to be right next to James. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself drawn into conversation with James. She learned that he was a tech entrepreneur who had started a successful software company 5 years ago. 3 years back, a car accident had left him with a spinal cord injury, but it hadn't dampened his spirit or ambition. "The accident actually helped me develop better accessibility features for our products," James explained, his eyes lighting up as he talked about his work. "Sometimes the best innovations come from personal experience." Sarah was impressed by his positive outlook. Unlike some of her past dates who had tried to impress her with fancy cars or expensive watches, James spoke passionately about making technology more inclusive for everyone. The conversation flowed easily between them. James made her laugh with stories about his terrible cooking attempts, and Sarah shared amusing tales from her hospital rounds. She noticed how he listened intently when others spoke, how he remembered small details about everyone's stories, and the way he used humor to make everyone feel comfortable. "So, what made you choose physical therapy?" James asked as they shared a plate of Monica's birthday cake. Sarah thought for a moment. "My grandmother had a stroke when I was 12. The physical therapist who worked with her was amazing. She didn't just help Grandma regain movement, she gave her hope. I wanted to do the same for others." James nodded thoughtfully. "That's beautiful. Making a difference in people's lives. That's what really matters, right?" As the evening drew to a close, Sarah noticed that 4 hours had passed in what felt like minutes. The restaurant was nearly empty, and Monica was opening her last birthday present. "We should probably call it a night," Monica announced, looking at her watch. "Some of us have work tomorrow." While everyone was gathering their things, James wheeled closer to Sarah. "I really enjoyed talking with you tonight," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "Would you maybe like to get coffee sometime?" Sarah felt butterflies in her stomach, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. "I'd like that," she replied with a genuine smile. They exchanged phone numbers, and as Sarah walked to her car later, she couldn't stop smiling. Her mother had been pestering her about finding a nice doctor to settle down with, but Sarah had always believed that titles and appearances meant nothing compared to what was in someone's heart. On her drive home, Sarah realized that for the first time in ages, she'd spent an entire evening with someone and not once checked her phone or wished she was somewhere else. There was something special about James, his intelligence, his humor, his resilience, and most importantly, the way he made everyone around him feel valued and heard. As she got ready for bed that night, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from James. "Thank you for making a birthday dinner feel like the start of something special." Sarah fell asleep with a smile on her face, not knowing that this ordinary autumn evening would change her life forever. A week after their first meeting, Sarah and James sat across from each other at Sweet Bean Coffee Shop. Sarah wrapped her hands around her warm cappuccino while James stirred his black coffee. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, making Sarah's dark skin glow. "So, you really taught yourself coding while in the hospital?" Sarah asked, fascinated by James's story. James nodded, his eyes brightening. 3 months in bed gives you a lot of free time. Better than watching daytime TV," he chuckled. "Though I did become an expert on soap operas." Their coffee date turned into a walk through the nearby park. Sarah walked slowly beside James's wheelchair, enjoying the crisp autumn air and their easy conversation. Children played nearby, and one little girl waved at them. Both Sarah and James waved back, sharing a warm smile. Later that evening, Sarah visited her parents for their weekly Sunday dinner. Her mother, Linda, was stirring a pot of her famous gumbo when Sarah mentioned James. A wheelchair? Linda's spoon stopped mid-stir. Baby, are you sure about this? Life is already hard enough for a black woman in this world. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. Mama, he's kind, smart, and makes me laugh. His wheelchair doesn't define him. Her father, Robert, looked up from his newspaper. Your mama's just worried. Mixed relationships are one thing, but with his disability, people will talk. Let them talk, Sarah replied firmly. I'm not letting other people's small minds affect my happiness. Meanwhile, across town, James was facing his own family dinner. His mother, Elizabeth Wilson, sat in her perfectly decorated dining room, cutting her roasted chicken into tiny pieces. James, darling, Elizabeth said carefully, when you mentioned bringing someone to the Christmas party, I didn't expect. Well, have you thought this through? James put down his fork. What's there to think through, Mom? Sarah's brilliant, caring, and beautiful. His father, Richard, cleared his throat. Son, our social circle. They might not be as understanding. The company board members. The same board members who doubted I could run the company after my accident. James challenged. Well, our profits have doubled since then. Anyone who has a problem with Sarah can take their business elsewhere. The next few weeks brought more challenges. At a restaurant, a waiter spoke only to Sarah, asking if he needed help cutting his food. At the movies, people stared and whispered. Some of Sarah's friends made comments about James's wealth, suggesting she was after his money. But for every difficult moment, there were beautiful ones. Like when James surprised Sarah at work with lunch, and her elderly patient, Mrs. Johnson, declared they were the cutest couple she'd ever seen, or when Sarah learned to help James transfer from his wheelchair to the car, and they developed a rhythm that felt like a dance. One evening, 2 months into dating, they faced their biggest test. At a tech industry event, a drunk competitor made loud, racist comments about Sarah. Before she could respond, James wheeled right up to the man. I'd say you should be ashamed, James said calmly but firmly, but that would assume you had the capacity for shame. Please leave before I call security. Later that night, sitting in James's car, Sarah was quiet. I'm sorry about what happened, James said softly. Sarah turned to him, tears in her eyes. Don't apologize. For the first time in my life, someone stood up for me without making me feel weak. You saw me as your equal. James reached for her hand. Because you are. Actually, most days I think you're way out of my league. Sarah laughed through her tears. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Breaking every rule society wrote for us. Good, James smiled. Some rules need breaking. As they sat there, hands intertwined, both realized that what they had found was worth fighting for. Their love wasn't just about romance. It was an act of courage, a statement to the world that true connection transcends all barriers. The challenges wouldn't stop, but they would face them together, growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. 1 year into their relationship, James sat in his office at Wilson Tech Solutions, nervously turning a small velvet box in his hands. The Atlanta skyline sparkled through his window as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He had planned everything perfectly for tonight. Sarah had no idea what was coming when she arrived at the Atlanta Botanical Gardens that evening. She thought they were just celebrating their 1-year anniversary. James had told her to dress up, and she wore a flowing yellow dress that made her dark skin glow in the twilight. James, why are there fairy lights everywhere? Sarah asked, walking beside his wheelchair along the garden path. Hundreds of tiny lights twinkled in the trees around them. Just a special touch. James smiled mysteriously. The garden staff owed me a favor after we upgraded their computer systems. They reached the rose garden, where a small table was set up with champagne and Sarah's favorite chocolate-covered strawberries. A soft melody played from hidden speakers. At Last by Etta James, the song they had danced to on their third date, with Sarah sitting in James's lap as he wheeled them around his living room. This is beautiful, Sarah whispered, taking in the magical scene. James took a deep breath. Sarah, this past year has been the best of my life. Before I met you, I thought my accident had taken away my chance at real love. People either saw me as broken or as some inspiring story to post on social media. He wheeled closer to her, taking her hand. But you, You just saw me. You never tried to fix me or change me. You love me for who I am, wheelchair and all." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as James reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the velvet box. With slightly shaking hands, he opened it to reveal a beautiful diamond ring. "Sarah Thompson, will you marry me?" Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, tears now flowing freely. "Yes," she managed to say through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." James's face broke into the brightest smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Sarah leaned down to kiss him, and at that moment, the garden's fountains lit up in a rainbow of colors around them. The next morning, they faced the task of telling their families. They decided to start with Sarah's parents, driving to their house for Sunday breakfast. Linda and Robert Thompson sat quietly as Sarah showed them the ring. Finally, Linda spoke. "Baby, are you sure about this? Marriage is hard enough without—" "Mama," Sarah interrupted firmly, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Robert looked at James for a long moment. "You'll take care of our little girl?" James met his gaze steadily. "Sir, most days she takes care of me, but I promise to love her, support her dreams, and stand by her side no matter what." Robert nodded slowly, then broke into a smile. "Well then, welcome to the family, son." The scene at the Wilson mansion was quite different. Elizabeth Wilson dropped her teacup when James and Sarah shared their news, creating a sharp crack in the perfectly quiet sitting room. "James, darling," Elizabeth started, "perhaps we should discuss this in private." "There's nothing to discuss, Mother," James said firmly. "I'm marrying Sarah. Either you accept that and celebrate with us, or you miss out on your only son's wedding." Richard Wilson, who had been silent until then, suddenly stood up. To everyone's surprise, he walked over to Sarah and hugged her. "Welcome to the family, my dear," he said softly. "It's about time someone brought some real life into this stuffy old house." Elizabeth, seeing her husband's acceptance, finally relented. "Well," she sighed, "I suppose I should start looking for a mother of the groom dress." That night, as Sarah and James sat on his apartment balcony looking at the stars, she played with her engagement ring. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. All the stares, the whispers, the judgments. James took her hand. "With you by my side, I'm ready for anything. Besides," he grinned, "we've got something special planned for those judgmental people at our wedding." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "We do?" James just smiled mysteriously. "You'll see. It's going to be a moment no one will ever forget." 2 months after their engagement, James wheeled through the doors of St. Mary's Rehabilitation Center, 20 miles away from Sarah's workplace. He had chosen this facility specifically because no one knew him here, and there was no chance of Sarah finding out about his secret mission. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson." Dr. Michael Chen greeted him with a firm handshake. "Are you ready to begin the intensive program?" James nodded determinedly. "Whatever it takes. I want to stand with Sarah for our first dance." The rehabilitation center became James's second home. Every morning, before heading to his office, he spent 2 hours working with Dr. Chen and his team. The specialized leg braces they had ordered from Switzerland had finally arrived, and learning to use them was both exciting and exhausting. "Push through the pain," Dr. Chen encouraged as James gripped the parallel bars, his arms shaking as he attempted to stand. Sweat dripped down his face, but he refused to give up. Meanwhile, Sarah noticed changes in James but misinterpreted them. "You seem tired lately," she commented one evening while they were looking at wedding venues. "Is work stressing you out?" James felt guilty about lying, but managed to smile. "Just some big projects. Nothing to worry about." The training was grueling. There were days when James wanted to quit, days when his body screamed in protest. One particularly difficult morning, he fell while practicing with the braces. "Maybe this is too ambitious," the physical therapy assistant suggested gently, helping him back into his wheelchair. James shook his head firmly. "No, when Sarah was having trouble with her medical board exams, she studied until she passed. When my company was struggling, I worked until we succeeded. This is no different." Weeks turned into months. James learned to stand for longer periods, then to take small steps with the braces. Dr. Chen was amazed by his progress. "Your determination is remarkable," he said one day. "But remember, this is not about walking perfectly. It's about those few precious moments of your first dance. To maintain his secret, James had to be creative with his schedule. He told Sarah he had early morning business meetings. He scheduled his tuxedo fittings at times when he could practice with the braces. The wedding planner, Maria, was the only person who knew his secret, as she needed to coordinate the special moment. One day, while practicing his dance steps, James received a worried call from Sarah. "Honey, is everything okay?" she asked. "Your assistant mentioned you haven't been in the office some mornings." James's heart raced. "Everything's fine, love. Just some private investor meetings I need to handle personally." After hanging up, he felt terrible about the deception. But then he imagined Sarah's face when he would stand up during their first dance, and it gave him renewed strength. As the wedding day grew closer, James increased his training sessions. Dr. Chen worked with him on the specific movements he would need for the dance. They chose At Last by Etta James, their song, and practiced the timing repeatedly. "Remember," Dr. Chen instructed, "when you first stand, take a moment to find your balance. Don't rush. This moment is about quality, not speed." The weekend before the wedding, James had a private practice session at the venue. Maria, the wedding planner, watched with tears in her eyes as he managed to stand and take several steps. "It's perfect," she whispered. Sarah won't believe her eyes. That night, as James lay in bed, his muscles aching from the practice, he received a text from Sarah. "Can't believe we're getting married in a week. I love you, future husband." James smiled at his phone, his heart full of love and anticipation. Vain, the exhaustion, the early mornings. Everything would be worth it to give Sarah a moment she would never forget. "Love you too, future wife," he texted back. "Get ready for the surprise of your life." Little did Sarah know that while she was busy picking flowers and choosing table settings, her future husband was preparing to give her the most magical moment of their wedding day. Sarah stood in the bridal boutique, surrounded by mirrors and white dresses. It was 3 weeks before the wedding, and her final dress fitting had turned into an unexpected battle. "I'm sorry, but we don't think we can alter the dress anymore," the seamstress said nervously. "Perhaps if you chose a different style, something that wouldn't look so awkward when you're sitting beside the wheelchair." Sarah's mother, Linda, who had come for support, stood up angrily. "My daughter will wear whatever dress she wants. If you can't handle it, we'll take our business elsewhere." They left the boutique, Sarah holding back tears. As they walked to the car, Linda squeezed her daughter's hand. "Baby, remember what your grandma used to say. God doesn't make mistakes. You and James were meant to be." Later that day, they visited another boutique recommended by Maria, their wedding planner. The new seamstress, an elderly woman named Rosa, looked at Sarah's original dress choice with understanding eyes. "Honey, this dress isn't just fabric, it's your dream. We'll make it work," Rosa declared, pulling out her measuring tape. "A few creative adjustments, and you'll look like a queen." Meanwhile, James was facing his own challenges at the venue planning meeting. The event coordinator kept directing all questions to Sarah, acting as if James couldn't make decisions about his own wedding. Actually, James interrupted firmly. "I'm the one who chose the lighting design. And yes, we need all the ramps installed exactly as specified." Sarah watched proudly as James handled the situation with grace. Later, they sat in the venue's garden, planning the seating arrangement. "Table 1 is proving tricky," Sarah sighed, looking at their list. "Your mom's society friends, my aunt who speaks her mind too freely, and my cousin who's a civil rights activist." James chuckled. "Put them all together. Maybe they'll learn something from each other." The guest list had been another challenge. Some of James's business associates had made polite excuses when they received the invitation. A few of Sarah's relatives had expressed concerns about the mixed marriage. But for every decline, they received twice as many enthusiastic acceptances from people who truly supported their love. One evening, while reviewing the reception timeline with Maria, James asked for a private moment. "Is everything set for the special moment?" he whispered. Maria nodded excitedly. "The DJ knows exactly when to play your song, and we positioned the photographer perfectly. Sarah won't suspect a thing." Sarah, noticing their whispered conversation, raised an eyebrow. "What are you two plotting?" "Just some surprise entertainment," James said smoothly, winking at Maria. The week before the wedding brought final preparations. Sarah's father insisted on having a serious talk with James, inviting him for coffee. "I admit, I had my doubts at first," Robert confessed. "But seeing how you love my daughter, how you respect her, you're the son I never had." James felt tears in his eyes as Robert hugged him. Even James's mother, Elizabeth, had come around. She surprised everyone by hosting a beautiful rehearsal dinner at her home, complete with both families' traditional dishes. "Sarah taught me her grandmother's cornbread recipe," Elizabeth announced proudly, serving the perfectly golden bread. The night before the wedding, Sarah and James shared a quiet moment on the phone, following the tradition of not seeing each other. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked. "About marrying you?" "Never," James replied. "About the wedding?" "Maybe a little." "Whatever happens tomorrow," Sarah said softly, "it's already perfect because I'm marrying you." James smiled, thinking of his secret surprise. "Just wait, my love. Tomorrow will be more perfect than you can imagine." In their separate rooms, both Sarah and James lay awake, hearts full of love and anticipation. Sarah dreamed of their future together, while James mentally rehearsed the steps he had practiced for months. Tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow, they would show the world that love knows no boundaries. Tomorrow, they would begin their greatest adventure together. Little did Sarah know that the biggest surprise of her life was less than 24 hours away. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. Sarah sat in the bridal suite of the historic Highland Manor, surrounded by her bridesmaids as they helped her prepare. Her best friend Monica was carefully pinning white orchids into her elegantly styled curls. "Girl, you are glowing," Monica said, stepping back to admire her work. Sarah's dark skin radiated happiness, and her eyes sparkled with excitement. In another room downstairs, James was getting ready with his groomsmen. His hands trembled slightly as his brother helped him with his bow tie. "The braces are hidden perfectly under your pants," his brother whispered. "No one can tell." James nodded, his heart racing. He had practiced with the braces one final time yesterday. Everything was ready for the big surprise. As guests began arriving, the manor's grand ballroom transformed into a scene of elegant beauty. White and purple flowers adorned every corner, and soft lighting created a warm, intimate atmosphere. James's mother, Elizabeth, wearing a perfectly tailored navy dress, was directing the ushers with surprising enthusiasm. "The ramp needs to be centered perfectly," she insisted. "My son and his bride deserve everything to be perfect." At exactly 2 p.m., the music began. James waited at the altar, his wheelchair positioned just so, as planned with Maria. His heart nearly stopped when the doors opened and Sarah appeared with her father. She was breathtaking in her white dress, which Rosa had altered to flow perfectly. The dress hugged her curves before cascading into a graceful train. In her hands, she carried a bouquet of white orchids and purple roses. As Robert walked his daughter down the aisle, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even James's father, known for his stoic demeanor, wiped away tears. When they reached the altar, Robert kissed Sarah's cheek and placed her hand in James's. "Take care of each other," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The ceremony was a beautiful blend of both their families' traditions. Sarah's grandmother read a poem about love breaking all barriers. James's young niece sang Amazing Grace in a clear, sweet voice. When it came time for the vows, James spoke first, his voice steady and sure. "Sarah, when I first met you, I was afraid to hope for love. But you showed me that real love sees past everything, past wheelchairs, past skin color, past what society says is normal. You never tried to fix me, you just loved me. Today, I promise to love you just as completely, just as unconditionally, for all our days." Sarah's voice shook as she spoke her vows. "James, you taught me what true strength looks like. It's not about physical ability. It's about having the courage to love without limits. I promise to be your partner, your best friend, and your biggest supporter, every single day of our lives." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Sarah leaned down to kiss James, and the room erupted in applause and cheers. As they turned to face their guests, Linda threw her arms around Elizabeth, both mothers crying happy tears. The two women who had once been uncertain about this marriage were now united in joy for their children. The photographer captured beautiful moments as the newlyweds made their way down the aisle. James and nephew threw rose petals in their path, while Sarah's little cousin danced alongside them. In the reception hall, everything was ready for the next part of their special day. The DJ had James's surprise song queued up, and Maria had positioned the special chair exactly where it needed to be. As guests found their seats for the reception, Sarah looked at her new husband with pure love. "I can't believe we did it," she whispered. James squeezed her hand, hiding his nervous excitement about what was to come. "The best is yet to come, my love. Just wait for our first dance." Sarah laughed, assuming they would dance as they always did, with her sitting in his lap. Little did she know that in just a few minutes, her husband was about to give her the surprise of a lifetime. The reception was in full swing when Maria, the wedding planner, signaled to the DJ. The music faded, and the DJ's voice filled the room. "And now, it's time for the newlyweds' first dance." Sarah smiled, ready to take her familiar place on James's lap, but he caught her hand. "Wait," he said softly. "I have a surprise for you." The guests watched curiously as Dr. Chen and James's physical therapy team quietly moved into position around the dance floor. Sarah looked confused as James wheeled to a specific spot they had marked earlier. "What's happening?" she whispered. James took her hand, his eyes shining. "Remember when I said love can work miracles? Well, I've been working on my own miracle for the past 6 months." The opening notes of At Last by Etta James began to play. James pressed a hidden button on his wheelchair, and with Dr. Chen standing ready nearby, he began to rise. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as James slowly stood up, supported by the specially designed braces hidden under his tuxedo pants. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Linda Thompson grabbed her husband's arm, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "James?" Standing at his full height for the first time since Sarah had known him, James reached for her hand. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Wilson?" The room was absolutely silent as James took his first step toward her. Months of secret practice paid off as he moved carefully but confidently. When he finally took Sarah in his arms, she was crying too hard to speak. "I learned to stand again for you," James said softly as they began to sway to the music. "But you taught me to stand tall long before this moment." They moved slowly together, James's braces allowing him to shift his weight in a gentle dance. Sarah held him tightly, still hardly believing what was happening. The light caught her engagement ring as it rested on his shoulder, sending sparkles across the dance floor. From their table, Elizabeth Wilson clutched her husband's hand. "Did you know about this?" she asked in amazement. Richard shook his head, too moved to speak. Monica, filming everything on her phone, was openly sobbing. "This is going viral for all the right reasons," she managed to say through her tears. As they danced, James and Sarah were in their own world. "How long have you been planning this?" Sarah finally asked. "Since the day I proposed," James replied. "Every morning when you thought I was in business meetings, I was at physical therapy. Dr. Chen and his team helped me make this possible." Sarah looked over at Dr. Chen, who was watching proudly. "Thank you," she mouthed to him. He nodded, wiping away his own tears. The song was coming to an end, and James was tiring, but his face showed nothing but joy. "I may not be able to walk every day," he said to Sarah, "but I wanted to stand with you, just for this moment, to show everyone that our love knows no boundaries." As the final notes played, James pulled Sarah close for a kiss. The ballroom erupted in applause and cheers. Even the servers were wiping away tears. Dr. Chen helped James back into his wheelchair, and Sarah immediately sat on his lap, kissing him again. "You amazing, wonderful man," she said through happy tears. "I love you so much." James's mother made her way to them, mascara running down her face. "James, Sarah, I was so wrong. Your love is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The rest of the evening was a blur of joy and celebration. Everyone wanted to congratulate them, to express their amazement at James's surprise. But the most beautiful moment had already happened. That perfect dance when love proved stronger than any limitation. Later that night, as the party wound down, Sarah and James sat together quietly, watching their guests dance. "Was it everything you hoped for?" Sarah asked. James smiled, holding her close. "It was better. Not because I stood up, because I got to show the world what I've always known, that with you by my side, anything is possible." By Monday morning, the video of James and Sarah's first dance had gone viral. Monica's phone recording had been shared millions of times across social media, touching hearts worldwide. #LoveHasNoBoundaries was trending, with their story inspiring people across the globe. Sarah sat in their honeymoon suite in Maui, scrolling through thousands of comments on her phone. "Listen to this one," she said to James, who was enjoying his morning coffee on their private balcony overlooking the ocean. "Your love story made me believe in miracles again. Today, I asked the girl I've been afraid to date because of my own disability to dinner. She said yes." James smiled, reaching for her hand. That's what this was all about, showing people that love is stronger than fear. Their story had caught the attention of major news networks. Interview requests flooded their inboxes, but they decided to give just one exclusive interview to a respected journalist who had covered disability rights for years. "What made you decide to share your moment with the world?" the journalist asked during their video call from Maui. "We didn't," Sarah laughed. "Our best friend Monica did that. But we're glad she did. The world needs more stories about love winning." Back in Atlanta, things were changing. Elizabeth Wilson, James's mother, had started a foundation to provide advanced mobility devices to people who couldn't afford them. "My son showed me that anything is possible with the right support," she told her society friends, who were now eagerly joining her cause. Sarah's hospital created a new program combining physical therapy with counseling for couples where one partner had a disability. They asked Sarah to lead it, recognizing that her personal experience made her uniquely qualified. James's tech company launched a new division focused on developing accessible technology. "My wedding dance showed me that with the right tools, we can break down any barrier," he explained at the launch event, with Sarah proudly by his side. Their families had grown closer too. Linda Thompson and Elizabeth Wilson now hosted monthly dinner parties together, bringing both families' traditions to the table. Robert and Richard had become golfing buddies, spending weekends discussing ways to make their community more inclusive. 6 months after their wedding, Sarah and James hosted a special anniversary dinner. As their loved ones gathered around the table, Dr. Chen raised his glass for a toast. "When James first came to me with his idea, I thought it was ambitious," he admitted. "But he taught me something important. Never underestimate the power of love to motivate healing." Monica, who had finally stopped crying at every retelling of their story, spoke next. "I knew from the moment I introduced you two that something special would happen. Though I didn't expect my shaky phone video to make you international celebrities," she added with a laugh. The viral fame had brought challenges too. Some people questioned whether their story was too perfect or suggested it set unrealistic expectations. But Sarah and James handled the criticism with grace. "Our story isn't about a magical cure or a perfect ending," James explained in a blog post that also went viral. "It's about showing up for each other, every day, whether I'm in my wheelchair or using my braces for special moments. Love isn't about being perfect, it's about being perfectly committed to each other." 1 year after their wedding, Sarah and James stood, James in his wheelchair, in the same ballroom where they had danced, hosting an event for their new foundation, Breaking Barriers with Love. The foundation supported couples facing similar challenges, providing everything from adaptive equipment to counseling services. "Look at us," Sarah said, surveying the room full of couples dancing, some in wheelchairs, some with prosthetics, some with visible disabilities, and some with invisible ones. "We thought we were just planning a wedding surprise, but we ended up starting a movement." James pulled her onto his lap, just as he had done countless times before. "That's the thing about love," he said, kissing her softly. "When it's real, it doesn't just change two people, it changes the world." As they watched the couples dancing, their story had come full circle. What began as a surprise wedding dance had become a beacon of hope, showing the world that true love knows no boundaries, no limitations, and no obstacles it cannot overcome.